works. Okay, so welcome again to the 26-27 scheduling season. This is the scheduling overview. So we're going to talk about some different topics today. Live site versus Power Scheduler is always a biggie for our newbies that are coming in and scheduling. We're going to talk about phases of scheduling, our scheduling components and considerations. Power Scheduler steps, and some upcoming trainings and work days we'll cover at the end of our training. So a lot of stuff to cover today, but hopefully we'll get your brains working and thinking about your scheduling for your 26-27 season. I'd like to do some introductions today. So as we go through, I'm just going to let our scheduling team introduce themselves, and we'll just start with you, Mark.
Great. Start with the part-time guy. I'm Mark Dahlman. This is my 12th year, believe it or not, as a part-time Meta employee, scheduling team only. I had 38 years in the field of education, 26 as a teacher, and 12 as an administrator, ending my career as a high school principal. And then I got snagged to help Meta, and I've been happy I've been here.
We're glad to have you, Mark.
Yep.
Okay, Margie.
All right. I've been with Meta for only 1 year, but I've done PowerSchool for 16 years, and I retired last year after 32 years, and I'm now working with Meta full time, and I love it.
We're glad to have you, Margie. And Stephen?
Hey everybody, Stephen Parpart. I've been with Meta and on the Power Scheduler team for 6 years now, just over 6 years. So I think this is my sixth scheduling season. Really glad to be here. It's always an exciting time of year. I like to see this meeting as the meeting that kind of not only kicks off the season, but also kicks off the questions and the inquiries from you, inquiries or whatever, from all of you, because this is kind of when our year starts to get to helping you. So although this goes all Power Scheduler season scheduling season goes all the way through June, this is really the beginning of it all, especially for our newbies. So please ask your questions. And if you still feel lost or need our help, always feel free to schedule time with us utilizing the work days that we'll talk about, but also coming up soon in our in some sessions we're going to talk about. So nice to see you all.
Okay, and this is our newest member of our scheduling team, Meredith Reagan.
Hey everybody, my name is Meredith Reagan. Like Kim said, I am new to the team. I started back in July, so that means this is my first scheduling season on the Meta team. I was previously a high school counselor working in PowerSchool and Power Scheduler, but I'm really excited to get a jump on this Power Scheduler season.
We're glad to have you on board, Meredith. Okay, so that is our Power Scheduling team. And again, we'll be the ones that will be doing all of the group sessions. We'll also be the ones that meet with you during individual sessions and the in-person sessions. So you'll see a lot of us throughout your school year. All right, so we're going to just go ahead and get started then. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide, Stephen. And again, there's our scheduling team. So if you ever need to refer back to one of our names, there we are. And we can move right along then. And we did put an agenda in for today just to kind of give you a little outline of what we're going to cover. Again, we're going to cover Power Schedule versus Live Site, planning out your schedules, giving you some examples of how you can plan out your schedules, and then you can, work from those examples. Your scheduling components, some questions to consider as you're moving along throughout your scheduling season, especially the beginning of the season. What kinds of things, what are your options, and what things you need to consider doing that. The items that you need, a training plan. just an example training plan, some to-do lists for you, and some, obviously we'll give you some time to ask any questions that you have throughout the training. So we can get started then. And we will get started with our Power Scheduler versus live-site scheduling. So when we're talking about Power Schedule versus live site, I'm going to talk about live site first. This is most often used in elementaries. Some middle school and a few high school use it, but most often in elementaries. It's typically a hand-built schedule or a copy schedule from your previous year. People who use the live site scheduling never touch Power Scheduler. They hand build sections and then modify the copy. So again, excuse me, these would not be people, this would not be staff members using Scheduler. You would load students directly into the course sections that they know they need to go into. So again, in an elementary, for an example, most students that are in the same homeroom kind of stay with that group of students all day. Therefore, in life size scheduling, you would grab those group of students, hand place them in a homeroom section, and that's how you would work that on the live side. It would be, you know, a simple, you know, grabbing your group that you want in that particular homeroom and putting them into basically every course for that day. You can use, with that, you use dependent sections. And when you place dependent sections on that homeroom, you're also placing those students into all of the sections that you want to go alongside with that homeroom. So again, it's all done on the live side. Nothing is done, you know, in Power Scheduler. And you can also, again, once you use that dependent sections, those would be, an example would be students that would be traveling together all day. Again, basically in elementary, but so in live site scheduling, you are making the decisions on where students go. The system is not doing that for you. So if you reference our slide here, you will note that we did, you know, bold it. If you enroll students directly into specific sections, then live site scheduling may be best for you. So you may have no reason to use the scheduler. So again, we're talking all live side. We're talking, you know, copying the schedule over, maybe using those dependent sections on those courses, and so on. Now, when using Power Scheduler, it's a lot different. There are several ways that you can schedule within Power Scheduler. You first must decide how to get that master scheduler. So schools do this in many different ways, but one district may sit down with a team, plan it out on paper, plan it on a smartboard, whatever. Other districts may just have one or two people that plan that master schedule. But someone had to build this year's master scheduler to figure out how to move students throughout your school day. And we'll talk about this more during the training, but I kind of wanted to get that point in your head before talking about the builds. So when you talk about the builds within the Power Scheduler, you're talking about a system build or a hand build. A system build is telling the system all of your information that you have, and the system makes the best schedule based on the information that you've put into the system. A hand build, on the other hand, is hand building every single course in building out each one. We do not recommend using a build as you know, someone at your district has to build every single course section. So you may have 100 courses or 500 courses, and someone would have to build out each one. And a lot of work and time goes into building each course section. So again, it takes a lot of time to do that. A lot of, you know, building those courses. It takes a little bit of time to build each course. If you're thinking about hand building, you may want to do a copy instead. It may sound intimidating, but you would copy your schedule from this year and put it into the new 26-27 scenario. You're basically using this only as a shell. You can use that shell and then you could modify the information from that shell. It's a good way to begin the process, and then you can make any changes to the schedule as necessary. So you can make as many or as few as you need when you do copy that schedule. So think about that if you are thinking about hand building. Depending on what's changing, how much is changing, how many new courses in your schedule, that's what will determine how you proceed from here. So again, when you're talking live side versus PowerScheduler, think about how much is changing, how many new courses, what your master schedule, what you want it to look like, and that will help you determine how you want to proceed. Regardless of what option you choose, you're going to need to load students into course sections. So are there any questions before we talk about loading students? We're not going to go into depth about it, but I'm just going to give you a little idea about some things that you need to think about ahead of time.
Yeah, feel free to put your questions in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute if you have any questions about any of this. And then while you're thinking of your questions, I'll just add to that some commonalities that we see in terms of who schedules which way is almost all of our high schools, if they're using PowerScheduler, well, I should say almost all of our high schools use PowerScheduler. Not all, but almost all. And most of our middle schools do too. So typically PowerScheduler is a secondary building way of scheduling. And that's why you'll see our lives. Sometimes we've thought about changing this language, but sometimes you'll see us use live side scheduling and elementary style scheduling interchangeably. So in fact, when we get to those specific live side scheduling trainings in the spring, they'll also say probably elementary in parentheses, because typically elementary schools use live side scheduling for the reasons that Kim stated. And I don't want that to scare anybody off. I just want to keep everybody's mind open to the different ways of scheduling. So you might be in a middle school that uses live side scheduling. You might be in a high school that uses live side scheduling. It is possible. So I just want to kind of talk through some of those commonalities. And I just want to emphasize something that Kim did a really good job pointing out, and that's the hand build. It says on our slide, not recommended. That would truly be like building every single section from scratch, which again, we discourage, like Kim said. If you're in PowerScheduler, you're system building or you're copying and modifying. On the live side, you're copying and modifying. So, but again, like Kim said, it's the key is how you're getting those kids into their courses, which is going to make the biggest difference probably for live side versus PowerScheduler. Any questions?
Thank you. Okay. So then we'll move on to talk about loading students. So again, I'm just going to touch briefly on this, but again, regardless of what option you choose, you will need to load students. And so when you load students at PowerScheduler, you have to have student requests. So any course that a student might need or does need must have a request. You may be the one entering the request. You may have a team member entering the request, or you may have another option, or having the student enter a request. So we will talk through those later throughout the training, but I just wanted to kind of get that set in your mind. So regardless, you need to load those students in, but in the scheduler, those requests will need, if you're using PowerScheduler. The system loads the students based on the requests that were entered in PowerScheduler. So just, keep that in mind as well. But we'll talk about how to enter those requests and the request screens later in the training, and also what options you have in regards to that. Okay, so let's go on to then the next slide, which is the scheduling phases. So when looking at the scheduling phases, these are the things that you have to think about before getting to the end of the scheduling process, right? We talk about mapping out your scheduler or your schedule and organization. That's, probably the top thing that you need to do. Organize and plan. Then determine scheduling components. So determine all your components that's going to go into whatever whatever type of scheduling you're doing. Recommendations and requests, building your schedule, loading your students, hand modifying those student schedules once they are loaded, and then your end of the year and commit process is coming, later in the season. But the timelines will vary by district depending on your schedules. But this is a good slide to refer back to if you're questioning whether you're on track or not. Just I love this slide only because it's a good reference. I'm done organizing and planning. Now I need to just schedule, determine my components and so on as you move throughout the kind of like pyramid here. So there are a series of virtual sessions that we'll start having, and individual planning sessions and in-person sessions that we'll start having. So the scheduling session, which is where you're at today, this is what you're attending today. This is the first part. This is like I said when we first started, this is the beginning of the season. It's a great way to start, and so on. And then you have the scenario planning, which is your individual sessions. You have the auto schedule setup, which is which is kind of your next session that you would be signed up for. And I do want to point this out, that there is a course management session, a training session that we are going to have. There's only one course management training scheduled. It's for November 20th from 9 to 11:30. And we'll put it on our YouTube channel just in case you can't attend. But if you want to join live to that session, it's going to be the only one that we're going to have. And we'll have one of our EMIS team members join and talk to us about what goes into the course management. So, getting those courses set up and so on. So that will be, again, only that one session on November 20th from 9 to 11:30. But you will be able to go back and review it on the YouTube channel. So moving on from that, student requests and teacher recommendations will be in December. And we'll have these again throughout the month of November and December. For those who start planning a little bit later, and then we start our in-person sessions in January. So just kind of, as we're looking through this pyramid, I just kind of wanted to tell you kind of where those training sessions fit into this scheduling phase. Again, we'll talk about each individual ones of those at the end of the session. We do have everything throughout the end of the year on our Meta Solutions website, which is how you signed up for the training today. And we'll, again, talk about those a little bit later. So right now, we're going to start at the very top with the organizing and planning on your scheduling phases. And I'm going to hand it over to Meredith to talk about that plan.
Thanks, Kim. And I will just direct everyone. Stephen put in the chat a note about the accessing this presentation from in our meta documentation. So I think that's really important. We're going to give you a lot of information today, especially as I go through some of these initial questions to start thinking about. So if you need to refer back, obviously we will have this recording, but you can also access this presentation within our documentation as well. So like Kim said, that first sort of step of the pyramid is going to just starting with your organization and planning. Doing this ahead of time just make sure that scheduling goes as smoothly as possible for everyone involved. So sort of the first question to ask yourself, you're kind of working backwards, and that is asking yourself, when are you planning on administering or distributing your schedule. So whether you are printing those and handing hard copies to students and families, or just releasing them via the public portal, when you want to do this is really going to drive your timeline. So a lot of schools and districts, that is going to be maybe closer to the start of next school year. It could be midsummer, but some districts might want to get students their schedules before the end of the school year. So really just whenever your district, both you as a scheduler and leadership in your district, it's important to start having those conversations now, because that is going to drive your timeline essentially. One date that is important for everyone to be aware of, and we're going to mention this a couple of times throughout the presentation, and that is going to be Friday, June 12th, 2026. So that is important to have that date in mind. So when I say, what that means is essentially is that is the last time you will have access to the functionality in PowerScheduler. So after this date, our team will run validation reports to make sure that as many students are scheduled as possible, that there's no errors. And we do ask that someone is available from your scheduling team around this time. So again, this is just an important date to note, because you want to make sure that you've used PowerScheduler to its fullest capacity. Obviously, edits can still be made to schedules on the live side, but those are ideally more fine-tuning student schedules on the live side after that date. Next, we are going to look at reviewing and updating curriculum. So that's something, and as Kim talked about, we're going to have that course creation training on November 20th. So just thinking about what courses are going to be offered next school year. Obviously, that's going to play a big part in the scheduling process and going to impact how the schedulers go about their work. Are you going to have any new courses that you're introducing? Are you phasing out any courses for next year? Those are all things that should be done before scheduling start, at least as much as possible. There may be changes and updates later on, and of course that can be adjusted as we move throughout the scheduling season. But if your curriculum and what's available to your schools can be as up to date as possible before scheduling starts, that's really ideal. If you are thinking about a different course numbering convention, that's also something that should be done before scheduling starts. Not something that we necessarily are going to push or recommend, because it can be pretty intensive, involving a lot of work. But if that's something that you're seriously considering, that's also very important to make sure that you tackle that before you really get too deep into scheduling. And just a note too, this is just kind of a side bar, and again, if you have questions about course management, definitely attend that November 20th training. But course numbers, there are certain rules that have to go along with course numbers and names. So for example, course numbers shouldn't contain spaces, special characters, no leading zeros. Course names themselves should never contain apostrophes or special characters. So just be on the lookout for that if you are making big changes in your course numbering convention. Another point there too, if you have courses that you haven't used in ages, maybe it just will vary district by district, sort of what courses are available. But, and it's not going to hurt anything having a bunch of courses listed there necessarily, but it can be nice to kind of clean those up. You can change those availability of those courses if you haven't used a course in a long time. So it can be definitely helpful to have that cleaned up before scheduling starts. Also, compiling a list of courses offered by grade level is never a bad idea, especially if you're using those student request screens. That will come into play there too. Okay, so identifying potential constraints. So when I say constraints, really it can refer to a few different things, but in this context, I'm talking about courses or other things in your schedule that are locked in some way or another. So the first example of that might be a single course offering. I always go back to the like band or choir example for these types of things. So for example, if maybe you're at a high school level and or at the high school and there's different levels of band, let's say, and students have to be in a very specific section, not just any section of band. So it's important that you consider where in your schedule that single offering is going to go, because the idea is we want to make sure that we are not conflicting with, let's say, another English class that might only be offered once. Do a lot of your students in that band class also need to be in that English class? Wouldn't work out very well if those were only offered during the same time of day. So start thinking about those single offering courses. Another example of potential constraints could be block scheduling. So do your students take different classes on different days? If you are using a block schedule, that might make for a different type of schedule, obviously, and possibly make fewer places for your students to load into. So block scheduling in itself could, in a way, be a constraint as well. Students co-teaching, so students assigned to certain teachers or co-teachers available while students are in a particular class. So maybe you have an intervention specialist that has to be in particular classes with particular teachers because they are working with a specific student population. So sometimes, and this might be done differently at different schools at different levels, but if you know that a certain intervention specialist has to be in certain places throughout the day, there may be some more like granular mapping out of the day for that teacher. So that's something to consider too. Courses locked into a specific period. So again, kind of similar to those single course offerings, but maybe that it has to happen at a certain time of day. So again, back to that band example, maybe you have a band director who is at the middle school for the first part of the day. So that your middle school band sections have to occur earlier in the day, whereas your high school band sections need to happen 6th, 7th, 8th period. So those are all things that you need to consider as you start to plan the scheduling process. And then special scheduling requests from administration. So maybe your building leadership allows teachers to request when certain classes are based on, maybe it's a science class with labs and how that works throughout the day, or just any other administration, building level, district level administration, and how that will need to be incorporated into your schedule. Okay, so I'm going to keep on this slide, but I do have a poll question, and I can actually just launch this, I think. Can you guys see my poll question?
I can see it.
Okay, so if you wouldn't mind answering this question for me. So when do you think you will be releasing schedules to students? Before school starts next year, before school ends this year, maybe midsummer, or you're not sure yet, and that's okay. So we'll give just a couple minutes. I already see people responding, so thank you.
A lot of good participation.
Yeah.
Seems to be a lot before school starts next year so far. I'm surprised how many before school ends this year. I don't hear that a whole lot, but
makes sense that you're here today. Then you want to get a jump on the early scheduling timeline.
yeah.
Okay. Leave this up. So yeah, a lot of before school starts next year. Some folks, good number of folks with before school ends this year. Some that are not sure yet, and that's okay too. Now is a good time to start having those conversations between you as a scheduler and district leadership. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll, and then we can move. Oh, I'll share the results too.
While you're doing that, I just had one
Yeah.
comment.
Yep.
Maybe be careful. One of the things that happens once you release your schedule, students start to get together and look at their friends' schedules and then say, gee, I want to be here or I want to be there, which causes a lot of a concern of changing where students are. So some schools put a kind of a ceiling on when you can request changes. maybe not right away or have 2 weeks to do it or whatever it may be. You don't have to do that, but I found that that was helpful in my school district to limit students changing because they wanted to be with their friends.
I agree. And we even kind of try to limit requests to, I needed this for a graduation requirement, or, this won't work out with, I really need this specific class for a certain reason, to try to limit those. I want to be with my friend, or I want a different teacher sort of situation. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. Okay. So one of the other components, and this is sort of moving on from the organization and planning, is sort of building your scheduling team. So this is going to obviously look different by district and by school building, but in general, we recommend around 2 people that are the core scheduling team. Obviously, we say 2 members. This might be more if you're at a larger district, but 2 members we identify as being really important in the scheduling process is someone who is able to, make these final decisions, and someone who does more of the actual going through the steps of the scheduling process. So an example I would say that, is pretty common is maybe a counselor or an administrative assistant is the person who's actually clicking the buttons, as we say, and doing all the things to set up everything that they need for scheduling. And then maybe a principal, an assistant principal, curriculum director, someone who's there to sort of collaboratively make those final decisions. Too many decision makers, obviously, as we know, can extend the process. So we recommend that there's really ideally 1 person or 2 people on the team who can make those final decisions. And if you have any questions about building, if this is your first foray into scheduling and you have questions, you can reach out to us and we can help you kind of formulate a scheduling team that will work for your building. Okay, so you've identified your scheduling team. Maybe you've already done this, and now you're like, well, where do we start? These are some internal discussion topics that you can meet as a team and discuss. This is a good idea to meet internally with just members of your school district to discuss these items. And then if you have any questions, or you want to talk through something more with us, then we can at Meta collaborate with you to talk through some of these things. But just some, again, a lot of information, but just some inspiration of places for you to start. Really, the first place to look that's going to inform how you schedule is looking at your current year master schedule. Is it effective? What's working really well in your schedule? What could maybe be better? And this can be informed from a lot of different places. So it can be feedback oftentimes from teachers, administrators, counselors. They're all going to have a different perspective on what's working well or what can be improved on in the master schedule. So thinking about that is going to be very beneficial in moving forward and how you'll schedule for next year. Are there any new graduation requirements? So whether at the state level or any local decisions. Obviously, not every single graduation requirement will inform how your master schedule is set up, but it could. So if there is any changes coming down the pipeline, again, both at the state level or your local level, those will need to be considered if they're going to impact the master schedule. So we talked about before any curricular changes, such as changes in courses, phasing out courses. That is something that's great to discuss at this point. And then moving into sort of more specifics of what your day looks like. Evaluate how lunch is going. It might seem like a small part of the schedule, but really how many lunches you have and when those lunches are can really determine, kind of drive your schedule for that middle of the day. So maybe you have 2 lunch periods this year, and that you are just having too many kids in one period or in one lunch period. So maybe you're looking at adding another lunch for next year. That's going to impact scheduling as a whole. Another thing to note, lunches are usually shorter than a class period, so that can drive a lot of what you do in PowerScheduler. And if students are in multiple lunches, you have to think, what are other students doing during that time? And that's going to look different at each school. And how do you account for different sort of chunks or slices of time throughout the day, which we're going to talk about a lot more in depth a little bit later on. Let's see, do you want to have different start and stop class times per grade level? So uh, sometimes we see this, I feel like a lot of times it's at an intermediate or middle school level. If maybe you have fifth and sixth graders and you want them to have slightly different class transition times. So they're going to have different start and stop times to their courses, let's say. You can do that, and it's something called cheating the bell schedule, which we'll talk about later on as well. But consider if you want everyone to going to the classes at the same time, or if you want different start and stop classes, or different stop and start times for your classes. Think about off-campus courses or classes outside of the bell schedule day. This is especially important, obviously, when you're at the high school level. If you have students that leave for part of the day, they're taking CCP post-secondary courses, how are you going to account for this on your schedule? Any staff concerns or teacher restrictions to consider. So again, sort of those staff concerns that maybe were brought up. A lot of times, maybe at the beginning of the year, teachers bring up certain challenges that they're having with how their specific schedule is working, and what does that mean for the bigger picture, and how can that be improved upon for next year. Similarly, any staff changes, new staff, retirees, transfers. Again, this is obviously going to evolve throughout the school year, but any information that you know now is good to just consider, because who teaches what is obviously may impact how your master schedule works out. Are you going to have the system build or help copy or modify and copy this year's schedule? So Kim talked about those different processes in PowerScheduler, and thinking about what your plan is for this year. Another thing to consider is, I talked a little bit about lunches, but it is important to note that all lunches, recesses, advisory, and instructional time should be accounted for on a student's schedule. Lunch too is especially important to be called out, because it is only lunch counts towards that non-instructional time. So this is where scheduling really intertwines with attendance, and is very important to make sure that you have a lunch on every student's schedule, that it is not counting towards instructional time. So if a student is absent during a lunch period, those minutes of lunch are not counting towards their absent minutes. Okay, any questions here?
I have one other comment in reference to what you were just talking about. If students are leaving the building for post-secondary options, there probably ought to be some kind of a course made up for out of building or post-secondary options, so that you know where the student is.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so again, we talked about the organization and planning, and now we're kind of getting more into the nitty-gritty. What are the pieces of scheduling? What pieces go into a master schedule? So the first is scheduling terms. And so when I say terms, I mean terms within which classes are scheduled. So if, this is staying the same for you going forward next year, this might not be a question that you have to think too long about. But do you have year-long courses and semester courses only? Do you have quarter-length courses, or even shorter than quarter-length courses? You will have to build out scheduling terms for every length of class that you have courses scheduled for. So I think this can get a little bit confusing sometimes. So if you just have, let's say you just have semester and year-long classes, even though you give a quarter grade, as many buildings will, you don't necessarily have to have a quarter length term if you don't have any courses that are just that term. So again, this is something that we're going to address during our auto scheduler setup, and you'll have to determine how many terms you will want to enter. Again, that can be adjusted, but it's good to have an idea of what your terms are going to be for next year before that auto scheduler setup.
And Meredith, just to dovetail off of that, I think it's a great idea. So the reason we have this overview and then we have what you're going to hear about, what we call scenario planning sessions, is so that when you come to that auto scheduler setup session in a couple of weeks or next month, again, we have several versions of that one too, you'll have an idea of the answers to that. And you may need our help finding those answers, and that's what we're here for. So this is really consider this the introductory course on all of that. And then if you need our help, just schedule time with us. We call them scenario planning sessions, and we can help you work that out.
Yep. Thank you, Stephen. And on that sort of applies to everything that I'm talking about. I mean, really anything we're talking about today, but especially on this page, this is where you're really mapping out what your schedule is going to look like. So a part of that too is looking at your day patterns. So are the same classes taught every day? Do they vary day to day? Do some classes meet only certain days of the week? So this could look like block scheduling, or this could look like music or lab courses that meet some days, but not every day. Again, if you are thinking of making adjustments to your day pattern, you have questions about should you make an adjustment to your day pattern from where you're at now, that's a perfect example of signing up for one of our scenario plannings, so we can help you with that. And again, this is where it ties back into attendance. So it is an important consideration there too for attendance. And then again, establishing how many class periods are needed. Here in a minute, Stephen's going to go into even more detail with these different chunks of time, because PowerScheduler essentially works with, we call it a few different words: blocks, chunks, slices of time. And this might be different than what students see as a period. These chunks of time are often different lengths of time than a course. So thinking about how long your lunch is in comparison to classes. How many lunches do you have? Are there classes split around lunch periods? I think this kind of sounds all vague here. And so, like I said, Stephen's going to go through these slices of time and visualize these things for us, but something definitely to consider. And after today's overview, you can maybe start to think about drawing out a schedule based on blocks, chunks of time in your day, and how that's going to look for your schedule for next year. So I think that is all I have for right now. So I will turn it over to Stephen.
And Meredith, I became a little inspired by what you and Kim said, all the things that you guys are saying about scheduling. So I'm going to go ahead and put a poll I just drew up in the last few minutes, because I know we've gone over a lot so far, and I just want to give everybody a moment. So the answers I came up with, some of them are kind of overlapping. You may think, well, more than one of those applies to me. But we're just kind of getting a pulse. I thought it was a good idea to get a pulse right now for the team of where you're all sitting right now in what you've heard so far.
I like that. It is a lot of information we're throwing at you.
And I completely expected that we would have a lot of variety here in the 4 answers I came up with. So, and there's no wrong answer. It's just kind of where you're at right now. All right, so we have nearly 50%. Everything feels clear so far, and they can envision how they would implement these ideas in their building. And we have a few that just not even sure what to ask yet, which is completely understandable. And then several looking forward to meeting with the team to learn more. So I'm glad about that. And again, you may have had more than one answer to this, and it's perfectly okay. Whatever you said. And then just a few, I have lots of questions, but I need time to process all of this, which again may play into the other answers as well. So thank you for that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. And Meredith, when I share the results, is that displaying on all your screen what the results were? Screen.
I believe so, yes.
Okay,
I'm seeing it on mine.
great. Okay. Yeah, I'm new to Zoom polls, so I'm learning here. All right, so let's move on. What I'm going to show you right now, this is where, to be honest, we lose some people in terms of the understanding and what's happening in PowerScheduler. I don't want to intimidate anybody. It's taken me some time, to be honest, to be perfectly transparent, to understand how these chunks of time that Meredith mentioned, the slice of time, work in PowerScheduler. But what I'm about to show you is pertains to a system build process in PowerScheduler specifically. So again, we've moved out of the live side scheduling. We kind of left that behind after the first couple of slides there. And we've talked about whether you're going to copy a master schedule and work from there, which some people do think sounds easier, but as Kim and Meredith went over, it's not always the right choice because enough might change to make a system build necessary. System building isn't necessarily harder, it's just different. But I want to give you some examples. So we've come up with, I think, 4, maybe 5 examples of ways that you could use those slices of time in PowerScheduler to system build your schedule. So again, some of these slides, if you've never seen this before, may look intimidating. And I want you to know, again, I'll echo what I said earlier, and that's, that's what inspired the question. I was thinking about that when Meredith was talking earlier and thinking when especially newer people, not even brand new, but people maybe have done scheduling for 3 years, but maybe doing something different this year, may need to think a little bit differently about their schedule. You may want to, we absolutely highly recommend that you schedule time with us to talk through that before you even start that automated scheduler process, which is why we've scheduled several of those sessions in the coming weeks. So I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide, but I want to give you a sneak preview there of what I'm getting at next. There we go. Okay. So Meredith mentioned the slices of time, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about. So along the bottom of this this graphic here is 23 what I call slices of time in PowerScheduler. Again, we're talking only about system building, the potential system building, and I do encourage you all to think through it. Even if you think you're a copy school in PowerScheduler, you might want to consider this if enough has changed, because you really, the end goal is that you want to give your students as many chances as possible to get as many things as they need or want in their schedule. In middle school, we're going to lean more toward the needs. This is what they need to be in. In high school, there's a lot of needs, but kids have a few more choices at the high school. So again, the end goal here is we're making the best fit schedule for the most amount of student requests possible, which is why we consider the system build to be the most effective in doing that. But just a bit about these slices of time. So this graphic here shows that there are 3 lunches in this scenario. And that's going to be in periods 4, 5, and 6. And it shows you at the bottom of the page underneath that yellow bar there, where the potential course could start, where a regular course could start, and where a potential lunch could begin. So lunch is going to be 2 slots of time each, and courses are 3 slots of time each. And you're going to hear this mentioned several times in the next few minutes, but there's on every course has a valid start period setting and a periods per meeting setting as well. And we will help you through all this. So again, I hope that I'm not scaring anybody away this morning when I start talking about maybe these phrases that you've never heard before. And then hopefully those of you who did this last year, some of this is starting to come back to you a little bit. It's again a little intimidating from the get-go, but I will say I found in my experience, and I've kind of witnessed and worked through it with a lot of users in the last 6 years, as well as did it in a couple of school districts myself. Once you go through the process, this becomes much more clear. Not crystal clear every time, the first time through, but it does become much more clear once you go through this process. So it is a learning process. We're here with you every step of the way. But I did, again, want to start with this slide. We need to account for the differing amount of time around the lunches. And that's for attendance purposes. So lunch is usually, not always, but in your building, it's usually shorter than the amount of time of the class time. And therefore, you have to account for those differing amounts of time where students are doing different things, as I like to put it. Some students are at lunch, some students are in classes, and those times are going to be a little bit different. So I'll be the first to admit this one isn't the greatest graphic. I think we have some better ones coming up here to kind of illustrate this. But this is a 3 lunch setup where periods 1, 2, 3, 7, 8, every kid is in a class for the same amount of time. And notice that we haven't even started talking about times in the day yet. You really don't have to account for times in the day exactly until the live side, until the summertime, when you build that bell schedule. With that said, you do have to consider what that bell schedule could and would look like by doing what you're doing in PowerScheduler. And that's a point I want to drive home in this as well, is that if you, as the scheduler in PowerScheduler, are not the person who creates the bell schedule on the live side, or edits it, or when the Board of Education makes decisions on times in the school day and what happens when, that all has to be considered here. So keep that in mind, that there's a lot of moving pieces and parts, and probably several team members to consider in your school district, your building, and your school district at large when making these decisions. So we have these red stars to designate when courses could start, and we have these blue stars to designate when lunches could start. So again, in PowerScheduler, you're going to tell it when lunches can start, when every course could start, that sort of thing. PowerScheduler doesn't necessarily care what time students change classes. Again, that's for the live side, the bell schedule on the live side. All PowerScheduler needs to know is that there are variances in the amount of time that students are in one place or another. So just keep that in mind as we go through this piece. All right. Let's see here. So I talked a little bit about valid start periods, and I will on the next slides as well. But I just want to point out here that in the end, this school is not going to have a 23 period class day. We're going to convert your periods at the end so that it makes more sense. And it may not be, again, this graphic isn't perfect. It may not be an 8 period day to account for all those differing amounts of time in the middle. But it's going to be a lot lower than 23. So they won't see a class 23 on their schedule or a class 21 on their schedule, because we will help to convert those at the end of the process. So part of this is not only building the master schedule, but then I'm getting a little bit of echo. Building the master schedule, but then at the end of the process, we're going to work with your team to find out what you want that to look like on the live side and try to make that possible. So keep that in mind as we go through these. So this is an example of a middle school that the grade levels vary a lot. So this is a pretty unique one here, I will say. This is a unique schedule in the way that each grade level follows, for the most part, a slightly different schedule. And in this example, the students have very specific, so you might see this more often. I've seen this more often in an intermediate building, maybe a 4-5 building or a 4-5-6 building, where they're very specific and where groups of students go. They're not elementary style scheduling like we referred to earlier. Kim talked through that idea where the kids just they start in the same advisory or homeroom, and they go to the same places throughout the day. That's not what this is. This is students who they do vary where they go throughout the day, but they're on their own type of schedule per grade level. And so they all start in advisory. One thing that you need to know here in any of these examples is there has to be a daily attendance period, a common period that all students attend. And that gets a little tricky for our unique schedule buildings. It does. And that's something, again, where even though PowerScheduler doesn't care about your bell schedule, what you do in PowerScheduler has to keep that bell schedule in mind in the future. So in this example, every student goes to an advisory class. It's by grade level. It doesn't have to be as you see because they all go for the same amount of time, the same amount of chunks of time, we'll say. The second place that all students go is one of their core classes. Now, where grade level specific schedules get tricky is what if you have students who take classes in other grade levels? And a lot of our middle schools do. You might have a 7th grader who takes 8th grade algebra or algebra with the 8th graders, let's say. And if that's the case in a schedule like this, your algebra class would have to take place in that core class on the 8th grade schedule taking place in 4, 5, 6, or it would have to take place in the other core class 11, 12, 13, because that's the only time that 7th and 8th graders have the same type of schedule throughout the day besides their advisory. So let's look at valid start periods. So valid start periods is always going to be one. The only valid start period for advisory is going to be 1. That way, if I have 10 advisory sections or I have 100 advisory sections, they can only all start in valid start period 1. It is 3 periods per meeting. All core classes are 3 periods per meeting as well. But note there's quite a variety because I'm encompassing all 3 grade levels of core classes. Again, these valid start periods are set on the courses themselves. So obviously, English 7 and English 8 are going to have a differing amount of valid start, or I'm sorry, a differing valid start periods, let's say. So some of them will overlap, some of them will not. But I've listed out every valid start period that's possible for a core class. Same goes for electives and lunch. I've listed out every potential valid start period for this type of course, but it will be specific to the grade level because 7th grade and 6th grade, for example, have differing electives. And so a 6th grade elective can only start in 8 and in 10, whereas the 8th grade electives can only start in 7 and in 9. They're all going to school at the same time overall, but they change classes at slightly different times most times throughout the day. And of course, we come to the lunches. Lunch is important to account for because lunch is the only thing in all of your schedules per the state of Ohio that is considered non-instructional time. And that's honestly what confuses the system build so much. A lot of states in our nation, they don't have those same laws in regard to minutes of time and instructional versus non-instructional time. But in Ohio, we have to account for every minute of time in the day, including instructional versus non-instructional. The reason is you don't want those minutes that students miss lunch to count against them. So whether your lunch is 25 or 30 minutes or a differing amount of time, if they miss part of the day during the middle of the day, if they leave and come back, doctor appointment or whatever, the minutes in lunch can't count against them, should not count against them. And that's why we have to have a separate course called lunch, whether we're talking at the elementary level, middle level, or the high school level. And it has to be accounted for in the student schedule, and it has to be marked as non-instructional on the course or the section. So just keep that in mind. That's why we're doing a lot of what we're doing here. So again, you're going to hear me say valid start periods. You're going to hear me say periods per meeting several times. That's language you'll want to get used to. If that's a new idea for you, that's okay. We can definitely talk through that. We can show you where on the course those are set up. And there's a really nice report right in PowerScheduler that we recommend to use, that once you start setting up your courses, all of that will be set for you. I'm sorry, not all of that will be set for you, but all of that will be listed out the way you have it set up is what I really meant. I was jumping a little bit ahead in my brain for a second there. We do encourage schools to reuse the prior year's course catalog. So let's say a situation, I know we have some in the room today. Let's say that you're brand new to the building, brand new to PowerScheduler, but the person that scheduled before you used PowerScheduler. So they already had all the courses set up, and you can kind of pick up where they left off using the same course catalog. So these things may be filled in for you, needing minor adjustments, of course. But reusing a course catalog is different from copying a master schedule. You can reuse a course catalog for a copy or a system build. But we do recommend that prevents you from having to reset up all of your courses. And then you only have to set up the new courses that I think Meredith talked about earlier, building those new courses out. So just a couple of things to consider there. Let's go on to the next example. I know this slide is very busy. I knew that when I put this together recently. What I wanted to illustrate here is what a schedule looks like on the PowerScheduler side, which is the top view there, versus what the schedule will look like eventually on the live side after end of year and the periods conversion. So a lot of you will put in a case in June. Putting in a case is just like think of putting an email into a help desk and getting someone's help with something. A lot of you are going to put in a case at the end of the year, and you're going to say, I need you to convert my chunks or slices of time into class periods, or you don't have to phrase it that way, obviously, but we call it a period conversion. And we're going to convert them based on how you tell us to. And again, just like a bell schedule on the live side, this is something that needs to be considered from the beginning of your process to make sure it's going to work. And another quick plug for our scenario planning sessions, that's what that's for. So today's the introduction. We have those individual conversations to help you figure out those things. So I want to show you what happens now from PowerScheduler at the top. We started with 23 class periods to account for those lunches that are slightly different amounts of time than class periods. And then we went down to the bottom after end of year, after the conversion, to have 10 actual class periods. Notice it's in the yellow. Notice where I have lunches. Each one of those has to be their own period. So on the live side, lunches on this schedule take place in period 4, period 6, and period 8. But notice that while many students about a third of students ideally in your building are at lunch, the other 2/3 are taking a class that looks like, for all intents and purposes, it looks like it's 2 periods long. But time-wise, if you look at my bell schedule, it works out so that those students are in class for about the same amount of time as the other classes take place. I think I landed on about 50 minutes, 50 minutes per class period on this schedule. That may not be yours. Again, this is just an example. So while it looks like they have 10 periods or 10 quote classes, they actually only take 7 classes in a day on this schedule. But you need 10 periods on the live side to account for those differing amounts of time around the lunches so that we can have a lunch on each student's schedule and all of their 7 classes on their schedule. Any questions on this one? So I'm hoping for those of that might have felt a little confused or intimidated at the beginning, and you might still be feeling that way, but hopefully this bottom visual here helps clarify some of it. what things will look like a little cleaner, let's say, on the live side. And so again, if you are brand new or if you are newer to scheduling or to your building and you're seeing classes that look like they take place over 2 periods, this is why. Periods can also be, or class periods can also be renamed on the live side. And some of you all are doing that as well to make things a little bit clearer. So keep that in mind. But in this example here, of course, period 4, you can't call that lunch 1, obviously, because some kids will be in the exact same chunk of time, will be in a class as well in that what we're calling period 4 on the live side. So be careful in your naming convention, not to confuse 2/3 of your students, of course. Here's another example, very similar in my opinion to what I just showed you. This is a visual we've been using for several years. That last one was a little bit newer, but you're going to see something very similar here. When we say no split classes, so you see multiple periods, no split classes. What we're talking about with no split classes is there's no point in time where students go to a class, they leave that class to go to lunch, and they come back to that same exact class. We do have an example of that one too today. And a lot of our buildings are utilizing that. I can think of a couple off the top of my head that we've helped. That they prefer to do a 3 lunch schedule and then split that middle class in the day 3 ways. And that way students can go to lunch, then class, or class, lunch, class, or class, lunch. That is not what you're seeing right here. In this one, students are almost always on the same schedule, except for, again, that middle point in the day. So if I have a lunch in 4th, I go to class 5, 6, 7, 8, and 7, 8, 2 different classes. And if I have a lunch 6, I go to class in 4, 5, and in 7, 8. So again, this example is very similar to what I showed you in the last slide. Just different times, different amount of time per class period, a little bit of a different layout. The other thing that's different about this one here is that you're seeing an advisory class here. And so after every kid in the morning goes to a class that's 2 chunks of time long in PowerScheduler, all right, so I'm looking at the periods in PowerScheduler on the top, then they all go to a shortened class called advisory. But this is kind of an easy type of schedule in the way that they all, at that time of day anyway, they all go to the same type of class for the same amount of time. So it really doesn't change anything except how you schedule it in PowerScheduler. It is, advisory is only 1 chunk of time versus classes are 2 chunks of time. So that's just we have several high schools who do something like this, where they want their advisory in the morning. And for some of them, that's when they take daily attendance, because every student has an advisory. Questions on that example? The best way I came up with for this next scenario is maybe if your building was split between a middle and high school. I'm sorry, that is not quite, let's see. Oh, I'm jumping ahead a little bit. So this is an example that I was talking about on the last slide of a class period in the day that split to account for that second lunch period. And what I'm referring to down on the second graphic is the lunches are in blue. So this is an example of a way that lunch could split a class. And typically, if we're talking about a high school, you might have something like, if you have study halls, maybe all your study hall students are in a 5-7 split class. Whereas, your core classes, math, science, English, social studies, Even something like band or art, where students are remaining focused on something for a long period of time, or something that's project based, you might want to keep together in one, I'll call it chunk of time, right? Like a 6-7 class or a 5-6 class there in the schedule. But there may be classes that might allow for more flexibility in that 5-7 split. So if you feel like you have about a third of your students that would be sitting in a class midday and you do need 3 lunches, you could consider this type of split. Now, the way to set this up is on my top graphic here. On my top graphic, I've shown that no classes are set to start in periods 6 and 7. All classes have a valid start period of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8 and 9. And it's after the classes are built, and even after the students are loaded, that you manually decide which of those middle of the day classes get split, which ones take place in 6-7, and which ones take place in 5-6. So just something to keep in mind. This is another way you could do it. Again, most of the examples we are using today are 3 lunch examples. We've worked with buildings that have 4 lunches. That can be more complicated, but sometimes it can be easier to have that number. And then, of course, more often it's a 2 lunch schedule, a lot more, so I'd say most often is a 3 lunch schedule, then 2 lunch. And then, of course, we work with some smaller buildings that they're the fortunate ones. They have a 1 lunch, which makes this a bit easier if every kid is at lunch at the exact same time, you can imagine. So you don't have to consider some of these things. But again, I don't want to let this scare you off from doing a system build, because a system build, once again, I'll just put in a quick plug for this, is going to give you a little bit more flexibility in getting the students their best schedules possible. Any questions for the split after the load? So again, we build the classes, we tell it when they all take place. The system thinks that these classes in the middle of the day only take place in 5. But then we manually tell it later which of these 3 that class actually takes place in. And in the bell schedule, the times that they're in these classes are very similar to the amount of time that they're in these other classes. So this is the one, I jumped ahead in my notes a little bit earlier. This is the best example of a middle and high school schedule. So we do serve some buildings that have that share middle and high school students in the same building, and they have to accomplish the same bell schedule between them. So they're on a slightly different schedule. So notice those chunks of time in maroon and in blue, and they're a little bit off for most of the day. There is one place that they come together at the end of the day, and that's high school period 7 all the way at the end, and middle school period 11. And again, that's to accommodate students who may cross over schedules. So the middle schooler may have algebra in period 11, but they take it with high school students, which is their period 7. So there has to be some overlap so that students are in the same chunk of time, or the same amount of time in a class. Because if a middle school student had a period 2 algebra with high school students, that wouldn't work, because there's a transition time in between 1 and 2, right in the middle of that. So again, focus on, this is very similar to our first graphic, going back to that, 23 units or chunks or slices of time we're starting with. And then we're telling the system when high school classes can take place, starting 1, 4, 7, 12, 15, 18, and 21. And then middle school courses are at differing times. And they have a whole different set of, some are the same, some are different, of valid start periods. Okay. And then lunch is, their lunches are slightly off. And something to consider with all of these ideas, if you're, again, completely rebuilding a new schedule, is what your middle of the day looks like in terms of lunch for staffing and for flow of traffic. Some of our buildings have, as soon as one lunch ends, another group of students are coming in. In some buildings, that's just not possible. But again, with all that in consideration, you have to consider how long you have your lunch staff for. As far as I know, in every building, there's a contract time that you have your lunch staff for, and you can't have them all day long. So, but we do have buildings that their lunches go clear from those large buildings from 10:30 in the morning all the way up until like 1:30 in the afternoon or later. So it is possible, but it just depends on what your district allows for that. But this is an example, one way of having your high school and middle school in the same building, but on a slightly different schedule for most of the day. The other thing you want to consider if this is the case is that if you're in a high school, middle school split building, you're probably sharing staff as well. And so that makes this one pretty challenging. Obviously, you may have an art teacher, band teacher, choir teacher, maybe even some math and English teachers that teach both at the high school and middle school level. And how do you accommodate for that if the periods vary so much? So keep that in mind. All right, let's go on to, this was mentioned earlier, cheating the bell schedule. So speaking of most of the schedule times not lining up, some buildings do what's called cheating the bell schedule, which is what I would like to say without, hopefully not confusing anybody, is that it's sort of, the reason we call it cheating the bell schedule is it's sort of making two bell schedules in one day. So if you're a staff member if you've ever had to work on your calendar per building, then you may have noticed PowerSchool only allows you to have one bell schedule per day on the calendar. You can have differing bell schedules depending on the day of the week, day of the month, time of year. Maybe every fourth Wednesday, you're on a different bell schedule. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about within a single school day, somehow tricking the system or cheating the system so that you're having two bell schedules in one day. And the only way to do that is to have separate sets of periods for your differing groups of students. So by creating multiple sets of periods, you can cheat the bell schedule by basically extending it. So in this example, I have a grade 5-6 building, and I have a set of grade 5 periods, and I have a set of grade 6 periods. And what I showed you on this slide here is there's an internal period, and then there's the period number that we renamed it, and then what that represents. So period 1, internal period 1, we would actually rename to 51. Unfortunately, in PowerSchool, we do have some limitations, and you'll find that out if you haven't already. One of those limitations is that you can't have a special character in a period name. You can't say 5.1 or 5-1, which I think would make a little bit more sense to a lot of us. So that's why we're calling it 51 or 5-1 for grade 5, period 1. Whereas looking down toward the middle here, internal period 11, so where all my grade 6 classes start, 11 is going to be called 61. So when the students look at their schedules, when teachers look at their schedules, even when you as the admin staff in the office and all of your office staff look at their schedules, it'll say 61. So likely on this type of schedule, no 6th grader will be in a class period that starts with a 5. And likely no 5th grader will be in a class period that starts with 6. So again, they each have their own set of periods. This throws a lot of people, so I want to make sure I point this out, what's highlighted down there. That's why we've highlighted it. What was internal period 21 is actually the attendance period. So that's what we're using on attendance for every group of students, whether they're in 5th or 6th grade. And so they either all report to an HR ATT period physically, or it may be attached to their 51 or their 61 class. That way, when teachers take attendance in 51 or in 61, they're all being counted for daily attendance using that HR ATT period. So it says 21 in PowerScheduler. It's not going to say 21 in the end. You would rename that. And you can sort it to the top. So in PowerSchool, on the live side, you can sort your periods to go in whichever order you prefer them to display on student schedules in. And again, if we're using 21 as our daily attendance period, some of you call it HR, some of you call it ATT, and that's why we gave both examples, but you can put it at the top of a student schedule, so they see that one first. So again, 2 sets of periods, 2 different grade levels, but they must share an attendance period. There is I mentioned this earlier, it is possible that you'd have crossover between 5th and 6th grade. Ideally you wouldn't, but if you had to, just like on my earlier example, which I can flip back to, there has to be a time of day where those classes line up so that grade 5 kids can take a grade 6 class, if that was the case. If it's not, that would be, again, pretty fortunate. That would simplify your process a little bit. But when we talk bell schedules, I don't want you to think about when bells ring in your school. It's sort of that. It's when PowerSchool knows that classes start and end for attendance purposes. So bell schedule is PowerSchool knowing when your classes start and end for attendance. Again, most importantly, they all have a bridge period for attendance, or daily attendance period, we call it. So, all right. So just a couple of notes on this idea of cheating the bell schedule. So for your individual student schedules and all your scheduling reports, the list schedule view that you probably use often and their bell schedule will look fine, because the bell schedule shows by individual student which class he or she are in during which time, 8:20 to 9:10, they're in here. Whether they have a period 51 or a 61, that doesn't matter on the bell schedule view. On the list schedule view, again, it'll say 51, 61 in my example here. The matrix view is going to be a little harder to read, and here's why. When you cheat the bell schedule or do something clever or creative with your periods, if you're used to using the matrix view of a student schedule or on reports, and they're not scheduled for certain periods within that. So let's say there are 21 periods in your scheduling day, and kids are only scheduled for 9 of them. It's going to look a little funky on your matrix view. It's going to look like they have periods missing. So just keep that in mind. Because there's periods that are not in use on that student schedule. Students may be locked into this bell schedule. I talked about that earlier. So a 5th grader, it would be hard to take a 6th grade class unless the bell schedules align for those periods in time. So we have a middle school, rather large middle school who's done that. There were certain times of day where their 7th and 8th grade classes would line up, even though they were on different bell schedules, so that a 7th grader could hop into an 8th grade class. And I kind of gave that example, 6th graders to 7th grade class and so on and so forth, but same idea. It could be difficult with combined grade level courses, especially when we're talking about staffing. I just want to point out once again, I mentioned this earlier, that there's no need to cheat the bell schedule if you have different bell schedules per days. You can only have one bell schedule on a day on the calendar, but if you have a different bell schedule every Wednesday, or again, every fourth Wednesday of the month, that's a little bit different. So you may have multiple bell schedules. You may have an early release and a late arrival and an assembly bell schedule or a block day bell schedule. I know we have several buildings that do that, that certain days of the week are block days. So they're going to be the same class, some of the same classes, not all, that take place on a differing amount of time on that day. Any questions about cheating the bell schedule or about anything about those varying slices or chunks of time to make a system build work so far?
I think that some people are probably don't know the question because they're a little bit overwhelmed
Yeah,
at this point.
I agree.
My suggestion would be just be patient in future sessions when we're working with you one-on-one. If you have a question at that time, we certainly can answer it. So don't feel that you can't ask us later.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark.
And a lot of times I think too, everybody, this is, this is something that we talk about a lot in your individual sessions as well. So, just because everybody is so different, everybody's schedule is so different.
So I put up a poll. I appreciate your responses. Some people are feeling very comfortable, probably are more experienced users, I'm betting. Some people are feeling somewhat comfortable. Makes a lot of sense. And then we got a couple people are feeling completely lost, and that's okay too. Um, and then at least one said, you know what, I'm copying, so I'm not even worried. I wanted to throw that answer in there because some people might just say, you know what, I know that I'm a copy school, and that's just the way our building operates, and so I don't need to worry about this stuff.
I love that. Stephen, so I hope you're okay with this, but we thought about maybe just taking a 5-minute break
Sure.
and let everybody regroup for a minute. Go grab a drink, use the restroom, whatever you need, and then we'll be back right at 10:36, if that's okay with everyone.
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay. All
That's
right.
great.
10:36. See you
Okay.
soon.
10:36.
So that's the most. I'm gonna be busy with the for the next 10 years, probably. Thank you. Oh, hell, like Dina today wearing my sweat. Hell yeah. We just changed the tennis plans.
Okay, it's 10:36, just making sure everybody is back.
Yep.
And we'll get
And
started.
Stephen, anything else you needed to touch on or?
No, I think I'm ready to hand it off. If
Okay, sounds good. Can move on to the next slide. Okay, so Stephen took us through that sort of zoomed in look at periods and chunks of time. So kind of zooming back out again and returning back to the idea of what your timeline is. Again, just thinking about, because this is going to sort of inform how you do these next pieces that we're going to talk about as well. So moving forward a little bit in the scheduling process, asking yourself about when will student requests be entered? There's multiple ways that you can enter student requests. So you can, as the scheduler, enter requests for students. Students can make requests in the public portal, which I'm going to talk about more on a later slide. So there's different options. So starting to think about first how you want to enter those requests and then when those will be entered. It is important to note as far as, and again, we're going to talk more about teacher recommendations and student requests both later on in this presentation, and then we'll have a training specifically related to those topics. But just as a note here, teacher recommendations cannot be entered until scenarios are built at all schools, including feeder schools. So for example, if you have current 8th grade students at your middle school requesting classes and getting recommendations for 9th grade, you will need a basic scenario at least built at the middle school. And again, just a reminder, all work within PowerScheduler must be complete by Friday, June 12th. Hand scheduling can, of course, continue after that, as mentioned before, but that is your deadline for working in PowerScheduler. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so some more questions to consider. We've touched on a lot of this, but this really kind of goes into PowerScheduler specifically, and if you're doing a system build, how PowerScheduler can work for you and some of the features that it has. So first, again, thinking through your terms, so quarters, semesters, year-long courses, your days, and your periods. We've talked about that a lot. Asking if you group specific students together. Stephen touched on this a little bit and about students moving together throughout the day, but if you're at a middle school, you might use teams, and PowerScheduler has features to schedule those students in teams. There are section types where you can designate a specific section to allocate certain students to go into that section. Not just any section of the course. You can say, I would like this student to go into this specific section type. And similarly, program balancing is a little bit more flexible, but can also assist with special populations, gifted students, special education students, EL students, any of those special populations. PowerScheduler has a lot of features that can help you get those students into the classes that they need to be in. Also, do any teachers teach 2 classes at the same time? So for example, if you have a Spanish teacher who teaches Spanish 4 and Spanish 5. So they're different courses, but they're taught by the same teacher and physically they're in the same room and it's at the same time, but you want to designate those as two different courses. There's a way to link those together, building a course relationship in PowerScheduler. Thinking about labs, do you schedule labs as a separate class, or if you have labs at your school, do you schedule them as a separate class, or are they a part of the class that meets in the same course? So what I mean by that is you might have, let's say, a chemistry lab that meets every day of the week, or sorry, a chemistry course that meets every day of the week, and then a lab that might just meet one day. So there is a way in PowerScheduler that can help you make that lab to be a part of the same course, but just occur on different days. And then this would be an uncommon situation, but important if this is something that applies to you. So if you have any sort of restructuring of grade levels, buildings opening, buildings closing, anything related to how your district and grade levels are structured, that can also obviously play a part in your scheduling process and something that you would want to communicate to us so we can help guide you through that. Any questions or anything else to add to this slide? If not, we can move on to the next slide.
All right.
Okay. So considerations for after the load. So there are a couple, I'm going to kind of skip past these top points here just because we've talked a lot about different day patterns. We've talked about scenario changes and creating new courses. There's that note here. But really, in thinking about these two bolded at the bottom here, splitting full year courses and study halls. So splitting full year courses is an option that you can do in PowerScheduler. So this would be something that once you've built your master schedule, you've loaded students into that master schedule. So whether you copied or whether you system built, students have been loaded in. You have the option, if it's something that you're interested in, to split full year courses. So what that means is if you want students, let's just take an English 10, for example. Students will see on their course requests, if you are doing student request screens, just one class for English 10, and they'll select that course. They'll just see it as one course to select. And then after students are loaded in, within PowerScheduler, you can split the courses so that you have a first semester section and a second semester section. So it will be the same course number. Each section, so each semester will earn credits separately, and you will get a different grade for each semester. So you'll get half a credit for the first semester if this is a full credit course, 1 credit course, and then half a credit for the second semester. So again, this is just sort of a district by district and school by school preference, but this is an option for you if you would like. But one thing to note here is that this is a PowerScheduler feature. So this is not something that can be easily done on the live sides, but it is fairly easy to do, fairly straightforward, and we can help you out with that, of course, on the PowerScheduler side. So if this is something you're interested in, this will be towards the end of the process in PowerScheduler, but something that needs to be completed within PowerScheduler. And then do your students have study halls? So automated study hall is another feature of PowerScheduler that looks at all student schedules, and anywhere it finds a gap, it basically schedules a study hall into that spot. It's important that you fully schedule students before this step. So lunches, holding courses, anything that you might need in a student's schedule should be in there before you are utilizing the automated study hall. And again, this is going to be something that you can do after you are done loading students in. Any questions? Okay, we can move to the next screen. Okay, So we've mentioned recommendations and requests before, and like I said, we're going to have a training that is specifically meant for these, that is specifically addresses these topics. But just as a quick overview, teacher recommendations and student request screens are both great features to use if you are not already using them. So teacher recommendations within PowerSchool can be entered only after a scenario and a course catalog have been completed in PowerScheduler for that building. So I talked about that earlier, as well as if you have, eighth graders making, or eighth grade teachers making recommendations for ninth grade, you'll have to have a scenario built at both schools. So teacher recommendations are entered in Power Teacher Pro, so not the grade book. And teacher recommendations can be made either per student or in mass. The one caveat to that is that student recommendations can be, or teacher recommendations can be made in mass, but cannot be deleted in mass. So those would just have to be deleted individually. But a prerequisite can be placed on a course that requires a teacher recommendation, which would restrict students from selecting that course. So you can really utilize recommendations in a couple different ways. You can have it there just as a guide and say, hey, you've been recommended for this class. Or you can use it as sort of a student can't take a class unless they have a teacher recommendation. So again, that's just going to vary district by district and what your policies are. And then student request screens. This is something, speaking from personal experience, I went through a transition at the high school level where we were using paper requests. So students would choose their courses, write everything down, get a parent signature, return it back to us, and then we would meet one-on-one with the student, but we would also be the ones that were entering in the requests. And that was quite a lot of work. And so we transitioned last year to, at the high school I was at last year, to using the student request screens. And it was a little bit of work on the front end, but definitely worth it in the end. So we definitely recommend course requests being entered by your students via the public portal if you can. You can customize the student request screens to fit your needs. So they are grade level specific, but again, you can customize to who sees what, because we know that especially at the high school level, you're going to have different grade levels of students that are at different levels of English or math or whatever that may be. So it is customizable to fit your needs. Similarly, you decide when screens are open and when they are closed. So you can, and we did this exactly, is we got everything set up. We brought in a trusted student. We had them sit down with us to see what they were seeing on their end. And that worked out really well. And then we felt ready to open it up to all the students to put in their requests. And there's also a report that you can send home for a parent signature once they've entered in requests. If that's something that your administration wants, you can have that parent sign off, as parent and guardian sign off as well. And I think any questions or anything else? This is my last slide. So any questions or comments here?
I would, yeah, just add that we have a training specific to how to set up those request screens again. And if anybody would like to attend that training, I think our first one's in December, mid-December, right before the holiday break there. But we also have another one in January. And so I would encourage anybody who has not used those request screens to attend that training to learn how. We talk about all the same things that Meredith just talked about on the screen. So.
Yep, thank you. And then that is all. I am going to turn it over to Margie.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I will be luckily talking about your pre-scheduling setups. Now, this is where your district leaders may need to get involved. On your creating your years and terms, this needs to be done in all buildings and at the district office on the PowerSchool Live side. Right now, you only need to create the year-long terms. And this can happen today, tomorrow, or if it's not your role, reach out to your district leader or whoever handles this part and ask them to take care of this. because the important note is this must be completed before you start your auto scheduler setup. And it's best if the dates are accurate, but if they're not, please make a note because they will need to be corrected before you load any students. So that's a key to creating your years and terms. So the sooner they're done, the better off you'll be with that. And creating your new courses, I'll move right on to that. You need to make them available for the current and next school year for the appropriate buildings. You can do this later, but it's much smoother if it's done ahead of time. Otherwise, you won't see those courses in your PowerScheduler when you need them. So if you can get that updated, if you know of any new courses that you're going to add for next year, or if your superintendent has come in and said, hey, we've got some new courses we want to add, it's best to do those now and not later. When you update your next grade and your next school, a couple things to keep in mind. The next grade should be completed. If it doesn't happen on the live side, no worries. We can still help you update that within PowerScheduler. And that's on the next grade. But on the next school, this should happen as soon as possible because this is a crucial part. Let's say you are a fifth grader going into middle school next year. If that next school isn't completed, you will not see that sixth grader in the building and you may schedule without them and not realize they were supposed to be there. Again, this could possibly be a district leader that looks these over, whoever manages this, to ensure everything's accurate. A good way to see if all the students are done is to want to run a quick check using your next underscore school equals. If you put that in on your start page and query that up for that group of students, you can see if they have moved on to the next school because it'll be blank for that group of students. Now, some of these kids may be kids that are no longer coming to you next year, so they would be blank. Again, make sure you check with your district leader or whoever's managing this to make sure it is correct moving forward. Any questions on that page? All right, so we'll move on to the next part. This is creating a master schedule. So I'm going to put a poll in here. And I just kind of want to know, are you going to system build or copy and modify your master schedule? Or are you not sure yet? Just kind of want to see where everyone is because this is a good indication as to what's going on in your district. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that aren't sure yet because you haven't discussed that with your principal or your higher ups yet. So this is a good way for us to see where everyone's at. I like this.
The only thing surprising to me here is how few system builds we have so far.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
maybe that's more reflective of the how many aren't sure yet.
That's true. That's very
Or
true.
Yeah.
how many are at what level? Middle school, high
Yeah,
school?
well, that's true,
Yes,
Mark. Yeah.
that's a very good point. Yes.
But of course, we can help, when the time comes, we can help you decide that based upon what you have presented from one year to the next.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. We're still getting.
Okay, yeah,
Oh.
we are. That's great.
Yeah. I'll end it and I'm going to share those results. So that's pretty interesting. Good to know.
That's very good. Okay, so on this slide, I'm going to walk you through the key differences between the two approaches. So no matter which path you choose to build or copy, you'll always start by creating a scenario. Everyone needs to have a scenario. From there, you'll need to set your preferences, which teachers, courses, and students you want to include in the scheduling process. So right now, those two are both the same. And this is where we make the change. If you're doing a build, you'll need to enter information for the teacher courses assignments, and you'll do that under the teacher assignment tab. This involves selecting each course and specifying the number of sections for that course. And while these steps may seem to follow a logical order, the system build process can vary simply depending on your setup. Sometimes it may be easier to jump right into, to wait until your student requests are available before completing this part. If you prefer not to manually enter your teacher assignments, you can copy them from your existing master schedule and make adjustments as needed. Some users find it more efficient and important, to import and update your teacher assignments, while others prefer to manually enter everything in each year. Honestly, this is a district level decision. You can choose the method that works best for you and your workflow to make it a little more productive for you. So all those steps are slightly different there. And then we're gonna, if you're doing a copy, you're basically duplicating your master schedule. It might seem like the easier route, but it can be trickier because after the copy, you'll need to go in and manually tweak each course section to get everything just right in your master schedule. Again, there's slight differences on those, but that's up to you which way you want to go. Now, as you begin building out your system build, you'll start setting up your build constraints and defining your relationships between courses. For example, let's say you have a chemistry class and then a chemistry lab. You'll want that lab to happen right after the main class. So by creating a relationship between the class and the lab, you can make sure the system schedules them back to back during the build. So that's something you need to look at if you're doing a build, is defining your constraints and relationships. But where that brings us back to is on those tabs, you will start entering student requests. Now, Meredith talked in detail about some of this, so I won't overstep and repeat. But again, you do have a choice to do them either in mass, where you're in a study hall or in a classroom and all the kids are entering them at the same time, or you can do them individually. That is truly a district-wide choice, or a school choice, I should say, for getting those entered. Are there any questions on that part so far? Okay, I'll go right into the running a system build. So if you're building, you'll start by receiving and fixing any errors that you have. You'll hand adjust your course sections on the master schedule. After that, you'll move on to setting up your load constraints and working through any conflicts or issues that come up. However, if you're doing a copy, you can skip right past the hand adjustments and jump straight into the load constraints, where you'll also work through any errors and conflicts. So there are slight differences, a little bit more to do on the build side, but still efficient either way you go with it. Now I'm going to move on to the reports at the bottom of this. There are some very helpful reports available out there that show many students got the courses they requested, how many they didn't, and where scheduling conflicts occurred. Once you've received those, it's decision time. This is where you'll ask yourself, do I hand adjust student requests or tweak the master schedule and then run a load? Or is it better to move forward with hand scheduling students to resolve the remaining issues? This all depends on what works best for your school and how flexible you will have within your scheduling abilities. So this is a school choice, a lot to think about on there, but a lot of times it's easier to build if your superintendent or your principal has given you several new classes. Are there any questions on getting that master schedule ready? All right, I will move on to that last page, which is kind of just a review where you want to evaluate your load, like it says, and post build reports You really want to look through those and make sure everything's right before you push that final button and review that master schedule. When you're reviewing your master schedule, you want to check and make sure all of your periods have the number of students or you didn't overdo your max load, things like that. There's lots to review in the master schedule, and we're always here to help you with anything. We're very available, and that's what we like to do at this time of year. We wouldn't be doing the scheduling, I don't think, if we didn't like it. But your biggest thing is when this is finished, make sure you notify your district leaders that school scheduling has been completed and it needs to be completed before June 12th. I know you've heard that, and I'm sure you'll hear it again with us. Any questions? All right. I will then turn this over. I believe it's going to Kim.
It's going to me.
All
And
right.
we'll try to wrap this up here in just the next few minutes so we can leave a little bit of time for any questions at the end. But here we're going to be talking about your end of year processing. So again, like Margie said, we're going to tell you this date, this June 12th date over and over again, just so you know it's engraved in your brain. But the Power Scheduler must be completed by Friday, June 12th of 2026. Committing your schedules. The Meta Power School or the Power Scheduler staff actually completes your commit for you. And this process really just brings all of your course sections, everything you've put into Power Scheduler, over to the live side and all the student enrollments over to the live side. And again, we do that for you. Our core PowerSchool staff actually completes the process by doing your end of year process, and they reach out to your district leader, and we really work hard, trying to get you a date that is comfortable for your district. And our team works really hard with the district leader to try to work that out according to what your district needs. But once this is completed, the schedulers can hand adjust any schedules on the live side. So within saying that, if we want to go to the next slide, Stephen, this is when you can, get those schedules printed for students. You can distribute those schedules if you're ready to do so. Like Mark said earlier, be aware that students do share their schedules and will maybe want to adjust those schedules if they're comparing them. But at the time, if you are ready, you can print and distribute those student schedules. This is often, before you do that, this is often where people want the conversions done. They want the schedules, the expressions to show correctly on the schedules, and those are things that you'll work with our team to do that. So that is pretty much your end of the year process. Again, we do a lot of that commit stuff for you. Moving on then to your scheduling prep. So what's next? The student schedule preference screen should be updated on the live side. These are all things for you to think about, as you're moving through. Next year's full year and term dates from the district leader are set. Courses offered and new courses are added, any new courses that are needed for 26-27. Any known changes to the schedule between this year and next year must be completed. List of known staff changes. So not necessarily who's teaching what yet, but what staff members that are staying, what staff changes who are leaving, maybe some retirees, things like that you can go ahead and change now, and that helps you with your schedule, getting your schedule for next year. So moving on then to the training plan. You are here at the Power Scheduler Schedule Overview. This is today's session, and that is kind of what starts our scheduling season. So you can kind of check mark that off your list, I guess. The next is the scenario planning. Those are individualized sessions. It's a 1 hour session designed for new schedulers, but also those who are making changes to their master schedule or any questions, any just very specific district questions. This includes adjustments to periods, days, lunch schedules, any additions, removals that may impact your master schedule. So we do have a scenario planning session this afternoon, but those sessions are filled. But we have a lot of individual sessions coming up. So those will be available on our Meta website under the events, and you can get on there and schedule that individual session.
And just to add on to what you said, Kim, yeah, it's really for anybody who has questions as well. You can
Yes.
even treat it like a workday session at this point, so that we do get some questions this time of year about, well, you don't have any work days on the schedule until January. We technically don't, but we have these scenario planning sessions, which can, I would say, double as workday virtual sessions as well.
And we do ask, on those individual sessions, we like to plan and use those wisely. So we ask you to do the same as well. Is maybe, get together with your team before that individual session and talk to your team and say, okay, we have 1 hour. What questions do we need answered within that hour? And, what are the most important things that we need to look at right now? And then, down the line, schedule, more individual sessions for those additional questions that you may have. But it's nice to come into a session and, kind of, get organized and just have your questions ready, and hopefully we can answer all those questions for you. So we do appreciate when you do have that, when you have your questions ready and you've already met with your team. Moving on, then, the automated scheduler setup. This is a full group training. We do require that you come to this training. We'll guide you through the auto scheduler setup process. It's basically, constructing a scenario. It serves as the basic step, the first step in the scheduling workflow. So and as you can read here, it's adhering to the proper sequence is essential to ensure accuracy and efficiency throughout the scheduling process. And sometimes when you don't follow, all the time, when you don't follow those steps, you may get down the line a little bit and find an error. And, moving back to step one is often harder than just starting at step one and working through that. So, stick with those foundational steps in order to keep that schedule workflow just flowing as you want it to. So student request setup and teacher recommendations. This is also a full group training. So you learn the advantages of using the online student requests. It covers setting up screen preferences, so your students can make and also building course groups so your students can make requests online, kind of what Meredith was talking about earlier. So we'll review how teachers can also make those course recommendations. So that is also really good full group training session for you to attend. And then moving on to work days. If you want to go to the next slide. So virtual work days will be on Tuesdays, 9 to 3 p.m. On the virtual work days, you will sign up for a specific time. One member of your team signs up for a 1 hour session and shares the link to the rest of the team. Members of our scheduling team will join you in a virtual breakout room, and then your team is welcome to stay in that breakout room after that hour session with us individually is up, and you can work together. Say if you're in different buildings, you're welcome to stay in that breakout room and work together on whatever it is, wherever you are at in your scheduling process. But the 1 hour session is guaranteed question and answer time with one of our schedulers, or a couple of us at a time. The in-persons that we are actually staggering some days this year. We're going to have them on Wednesdays or Thursdays. Our team does alternate between Columbus and Marion offices, And I thought this was kind of funny. BYOD, bring your own device, please. I love that. We do have computers available in Marion and Columbus. But a lot of times it's really nice for you to be able to work on your own device. So, bring your own device if you are able to do so. Um, 2 work days are scheduled in Strongsville this year. So if you're closer to the Strongsville area, we do have one in February and one in April, and those are BYOD, bring your own device only. So they do not have extra computers available for us to use up there. Each member of the team should register for these in-person sessions only because we're limited in space. So, we don't want if you're bringing your whole team, each person should register so that we make sure that we do have a seat for everyone in those in-person sessions. And then in Marion and Columbus, the lab will be open for you to work in if you would prefer to do that. Registration opens on the Meta calendar approximately 4 weeks before the session. Please, please, please remember to cancel your registration if you are unable to attend, because especially those in-person sessions, once we get really into the thick of the scheduling season, we don't want anyone to be too crowded in the rooms, and we just want to make sure that everybody that needs to get in there and work can do so. So again, if you could please remember to cancel your registration, and for the virtual sessions as well, because those kind of also get, everybody wants to have those sessions at the thick of the scheduling season. So anyway, we would just appreciate that if you could do that.
I did
And
want to point
then,
out, Kim, that
oh,
I'm
yeah,
sorry, Kim.
that's
I
okay.
did want to point out that we're not using Eventbrite this year. So if you've had an Eventbrite uh, account in the past, you will no longer need that. Some of you just went out to the website, you'd register and as a guest, and that was all well and fine. We don't have Eventbrite anymore. We're using a different program for our calendar. So the way you register is going to look almost the same. So you're going to go out to our calendar, you're going to register for the event just like you would have today. And if you didn't register today, it's on our website, on our calendar. You click into the event and click register. So it looks kind of the same to you, but one thing we've noticed that there's no automated reminder sent out. So that reminder that you received from me this morning, that was manual. That was just me copying and pasting email addresses into an email and into a blind carbon copy email and sending that to you. I can't guarantee that will always happen. We're going to try to get some reminders out when we can, but I just wanted to point that out, that when you register for an event, be sure to put it on your calendar, as I'm sure you do. And that way you remember your appointments and the days that you sign up for. That'd be really helpful, because again, you won't always get a reminder from us.
Yes, that is correct. We are all getting used to the new system that we're using, so we're going to do our best to send those reminders. But like Stephen said, it's once you get that signed up, make sure you do add that to your own personal calendar. And then just closing, if you ever have any questions in the meantime, between sessions, between virtual and individual sessions, please reach out to us at ps.scheduling.support@metasolutions.net. We are still there to answer your questions, whether we're in a session or not. It may take a little bit longer when we're in a full day virtual or in-person session, but we'll get to your question, and we'll definitely get to you as needed. So yeah, please reach out to us for that support at any time, and we will do our best to get back with you as soon as possible. So that is the conclusion of our overview training.